Welcome to 2021 webinar on Cruciform Columns. Hi, my name's Mark Lau. I've been a support rep here with SDS2 for about 8 years.
And yes, I'm James Schwartz, software advocate, 36 years in this industry, way too long, 20 years at SDS2 and 16 in production.
So James, I was just trying to think about this. 36 years. I was 4 years old when you started in the industry, and probably most of our support reps weren't even alive yet.
Yeah, that's why I say respect your elders.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So with the Cruciform column here, the focus of the project was to make available basic flanged cruciform columns. This was a relatively large task considering the short amount of time that we had to create the addition to SDS2. Adding a section proved to have a lot of tendrils into many core areas of the code. We had to reduce the scope to get in the essentials as derived from discussions from a few of our select stakeholders. In short, we will complete what is in our scope, but not everything under the sun will be provided. The core of our scope consisted of these areas here. We added 4 types of cruciform columns, the welding for the different material types to form the cruciform columns, base plates welds commonly used for cruciform columns. Beam connections to cruciform columns consists of clip angles, end plates, shear plates, moment connections. There are vertical brace connections. A number of the current 950 connections will work. There's going to be drawing output. And then you'll also have exports such as IFC and CNC. We did have to exclude some of the items from the scope to make this possible. And some of those examples would be bent plate, joist connections, seismic connections, sloping and skewed moment connections, column splices. For these, you can model in beams and braces as the cruciform sections, but you won't get any connections for them, or any members framing to them will not receive connections either. Girts will not generate connections to the cruciform columns, stiffener plates, and then adding any components or parametrics will not work for the cruciform columns. Even with these exclusions, you will find that you are much further ahead of the previous versions being able to add in the cruciform column. Just the enhancement of splitting the welds for the flange and the web base plates will be an added value for our customers. So why did we take on this cruciform project, you ask?
That's a good question, Mark. You know, for our users, for you guys, clients to be successful, we also need to be successful, which means that we need to expand into different markets. You know, if you're not growing, you're dead pretty much. And in some of these markets, cruciform sections are required, some of our South American markets and other markets out there. Also, one of the major additions of software is, as you mentioned before, is being able to separate the base plate welds between the flange and the web. This has been a long-term request. I had one guy who actually said it brought a tear to his eye when he saw that we could actually do this now. So, you know, even though it is a requirement for the cruciform, everybody's going to benefit from this just one type of operation. So, you know, there's a lot of side benefits or residuals that we see from adding in these different tools, even if you might see that you're not using this particular cruciform. But believe me, if you get a project and you're bidding on, you're going to be happy if it has cruciform that we can do.
Well, James, since you have the 36 years of experience with steel and SDS2, how about we have you present some of these functionalities that have been added to SDS2?
Sure, no problem. You know, if I can remember them. Hold on, let me put my cane down here. Okay, let's start.
Starting with the material file editor, you will see we have 4 different formats for cruciform sections. Notice that for the WF-WT, which is wide flange WT, and the WF-plate, which is a wide flange plate, you can add a welded wide flange section. One caution about selecting welded wide flanges is that you will not get the weld between the flange and the web. Selecting cruciform plate would be a better option. For WT sections, if you cut them from a wide flange, you will want to adjust the stem depth of the WT in the WT material type. You can control all the welds for connecting the material for your cruciform section. So for example, you can have the stem to flange be a bevel groove weld and the web to web be a fillet. There is an option to set to none if you want to provide a weld manually, like a stitch weld up to a connection and then a continuous weld. On a side note, be aware that flats will be used for the plates if they are found in the project settings, standard fabricator connections, preferred connection material size screen. Throughout the program, the cruciform section had to be added where it is applicable, including selection lists, for example, the member edit screen. In project settings, connections, cruciform sections have been added to the auto standard for from beams to columns, and from columns to columns. Material grades for cruciform sections have also been added. In the Fabricator Project Settings Piece Marking section, Member and Material Piece Marking, the Use Member Mark for Main Material and Model section will assign each material that composes the cruciform section to have a shipping mark, assigning a suffix to each subpart, as you can see here in the BOM. Now for the change with the biggest impact. For both cruciform and all section types, the user base cap plate schedule has expanded the welds to the base plates. This was a project on its own and will benefit both those using cruciform column sections and those using all other types of sections. For the selected base plate, you can set different weld configurations when the plate is used for either a base or a cap plate condition, or use the same configuration for both. Setting the weld all around will disable the other options. There are two options for a weld all around, fillet or square groove. For all the locations of a square groove, if this section is a tube or hollow section, the square groove will be applied. But if any section other than a tube or hollow section is used, the weld will be changed to a fillet. The size for each weld condition can be set here on the right. Column flanged baseplate welds can be none, one side, or both sides, with a type of fillet, square groove for tubes, pipes, or hollow structural sections, or bevel groove. When a one-sided weld is selected on the flange with a fillet type, cruciform sections will have the weld added to the outside faces, where wide flanges and welded wide flanges will have the welds applied to one flange exterior and the other weld on the two interior faces. So you will not have to roll the column when welding the base plate. Web welds can be none or both sides, with a fillet weld type or a square groove weld for tubes only. For seal welds, a simple no or yes option with the size on the right. When a bevel groove weld type is set for the flange, the default values for the preparation and the reentrant cut, that is the type and values, are applied. When it comes to the alternate 1 and alternate 3, as per the AISC, plate sections require the use of alternate 3 and rolled sections alternate 1. The system is intelligent enough to detect this and will apply alternate 3 values to the plate material. I will set the web weld to none for clarity. As you can see here with the wide flange with the T cruciform, you have the alternate 1 for the wide flange and the T's. Now, if I just change the section to a wide flange with plate T's, you will notice the re-entrant cuts in the plate T's have automatically changed to alternate 3 cuts. The preparations and re-entrant cuts can be overridden in the member edit End Preparations. The welds can also be modified on an individual basis on the member edit screen. Please note that the preparation of flanges made out of plates will not be shown in the model. You won't see the chamfer. This operation is not yet supported. To complete the user base and cap plate welds, I will mention that the welds are not hashed into the piece marks, so the plates will not get different marks due to different weld configuration. I will begin with showing the stick line representation is done for 3D and will also be done for your 2D erection drawings. The MOI member orientation indicators for both 2D and 3D are complete. As you can see here in the display options, the cruciform section has been added to the MOI. All of this is great, but what about connections? Before we get to connections, I must mention that the system needs to recognize the cruciform sections in node matching. This was done for all the members connecting to the columns. Without node matching, there would be no connections. I will now give you a quick visual of the connections we support to the cruciform sections. First, I'll set the failed connections to be indicated with the status display. We do not support skewed moment connections, but we will support skewed connections so long as the material lands on the flange. A few points I need to mention. We do not support the design for the web stresses. So, if you want a moment connection to a column without forcing the connection, simply turn off the design doublers and stiffeners. We do have a stretch goal for creating a stiffener component for 2021i. Of course, no promises. As you can see in this reduced flange condition, the system does do some framing situation checks, changing the clip angle connection to a shear plate. You can see here that we have the sloping cut for the sloping cantilever condition. A bit of tricky code. Again, plate material perpendicular to slope, there will not be a bevel. Like I mentioned earlier, we can't get the chamfer. With over 950 scenarios possible with vertical braces, we support a large portion of them. We have excluded the wide flange, web horizontal, with flange plates in this phase. You can see that the axle loads are applied for the brace and as well for beam connections. But if the web stresses are exceeded, the connection will fail until we get the ability to add in the stiffener plates. We can see that the horizontal braces provided the correct cut clearances around the cruciform columns. For cruciform sections, you have the ability to set the rotation from 0 to 360 degrees. To finish us off, we've added a D-face option to the member isolate. By default, a cruciform section will have a D-face added so that you can turn it off or on if you would like. We have gone through all the exports and all of them seem to be working well at the moment from CNC to KISS export. Finally, we have worked on cleaning up the detailing. There is always more work to be done, but this is a good start. Let's look at this prep at the bottom of the flange. So this concludes the functionality demo. Unless you have anything to add to this, Mark, we'll move on to the question period.
So I do not have anything to add, James. So let's go ahead and open this up to some questions. First, we're going to go ahead and we're going to run a couple of polls here to see what your guys' opinions are here. So we'll run this first poll and then we'll start getting into the questions here. So then you've got it. Have you used or bid on a project that used cruciform section? So fairly easy question here. So while this poll is going on, I'll go ahead and if you guys want to start typing in questions into the GoToWebinar area, we can definitely answer questions. James, I'm going to start out with an easy one that's kind of a lighthearted one here. One of our customers said, "Hi, James. Have you ever thought to be an announcer or do an announcer's job?" I guess he liked your webinar there.
Yeah, no, I got a heart of steel. What can I tell you? I think I'll stick to this, but thank you. I assume that it was good. So,
Well, that is good. Okay, so we will, while this poll is still going on, we've got a couple more questions here. So the next one is cruciform section applicable only for columns, not beams?
as it was stated, the cruciform sections are for columns. You can add in a cruciform as a beam or a brace, but unfortunately, what's going to happen is you will not get any connections for that cruciform beam, and you will not get any connections to that cruciform beam. We focused first on the columns. So that's it for now.
Okay, we'll move on to another question here, and James, maybe you can understand it, or maybe we can get some confirmation here. Ask about, we had a job with columns partially cruciform. Is that possible?
Out of the box, you can't just go ahead. We only allow one material type for the column. Is it possible? Yes, you can do a column where you have a cruciform on the bottom with a cap plate is what I usually saw. And then you add another column on top, and you could use group members to combine them or some of the several other methods. But we only have one slot. So can you get it done? Yes. Is it an easy automatic? Easy, but not necessarily automatic. So I would, again, add in a lower column and an upper column and then group them together and get all my connections.
All right, thank you, James.
Yep.
All right, the poll's still going here, so we'll have a couple of more votes here, and then we can, oh, we've got it up here on the screen to where it looks like we've got 23% of our customers have had a project or bid a project with Cruciform, and then we've got about 77 so far that have not had the Cruciform.
Yeah, most of the time, I see cruciform on, you'll see them at airports. You'll see them, again, it depends on what type of job you're doing. Usually they like these exposed, but I have seen them in industrial projects as well. So, it's not as common as a standard wide flange or two, but they are used.
Okay, so we're going to close this poll down, and before we get into some more questions here, let's go ahead and run another poll here to get some answers from you guys here. But then we'll move into the next question, and that would be connection on cruciform columns WT can check the bolt erectability.
Okay, on the WT, we are not doing a bolt check. Basically, what we're doing is we are allowing you just like we normally would, but basically if they're referring to being able to get the hand in back to put the nut, which I believe the question is asking, that's kind of up to you to make sure that there's enough hand space to be able to get around and to put the nut onto that, or choose another connection type like a shear tab or a double angle knife connection welded to supporting member. So that's basically, again, I'm understanding the question that they're looking for being able to get their hand in back to be able to check. We are checking, of course. I do believe we are checking the K distance like we normally would with a wide flange. But other than that, yeah, that's as far as it goes.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of how I read it too, clearance to be able to get in there and tighten down the bolt with the nut there.
Yeah, we can't always change connections, especially when you're dealing with cruciform, you're going to be dealing with some pretty heavy material. They're not going to be, there will be some lights, but, obviously they're using the section type for torsion and for the compression that's going to be required. So yeah, I'll stop on that. Next.
All right. And it looks like we got some participants with this second poll here, but just so you guys can see there, see if you're using cruciform sections for other member types like braces or beams or others. So if you guys want to fill out the poll here, and we will continue on with some questions.
Well, obviously one person does because they asked the question. So
yes,
I know there's other types of requests, but we got to start somewhere. Okay, next question.
All right, next question that came up is, what about non-flange cruciform, like welded T's or 4 angles? Any plans?
Yes. Well, the question of are there any plans usually depends on the demand and our space on what we're working on. There are a number of different types of cruciforms. Like for example, with braces, usually they're non-flange connection types. Usually you'll have like 4 angles welded back to back, or T's. They'll weld those T's. So is it in the plans? Well, again, it all depends on the demand for it. We started off with Cruciform like everything else. It's a development is a process. So right now, I don't know of any. That's not really my area to say what's going to be in there, but we are aware of it. One of the things that I do see is a big request too is on the ends of their buildings, your exteriors. A lot of times they'll just have a T on one face, or they'll have T's that are offset. Those are all things that we have in our backlog to do, and as we see demand, we can apply those accordingly.
All right, sounds great. Thanks, James.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're still looking at this poll. Looks like we've kind of slowed down here a little bit to 46%, but we'll go ahead and throw this up. Looks like other is going to be a majority here, but like James said before, we had one person talk about beams, and it looks like 17% of the people that voted here would like to use cruciform sections for the beams.
Now, for the other, unfortunately, in the poll, we didn't have something to fill in. So I would really like you, for others, if you voted others, which is a large percentage, I would really appreciate an email, james@sds2.com, and just tell me what your other is. So whenever there's an other, just write the question and what your other case is, because I'd really like to know that.
Absolutely. And if you email James, you can also email support@sds2.com, and we can also put in that request. So
yeah, support might actually be faster than me, because what can I tell you? I'm too busy learning to be an announcer. Haha.
There you go. There you go. All right, let's move on to the third poll. We'll bring that up, and then we'll get into some more questions here. Looks like the third poll is going to be, what connection type that is not done would you like to see worked on here? So for the cruciform there, would you like bent plate, seismic, or joist?
Yeah, I'd like to get an idea of what people are looking for, so we can, it helps us with our development planning for these items.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's go ahead and look into another question here. Do you support cruciform with only one T on one side of the web?
Well, I just answered that question before, and the answer is no. Unfortunately, I know, like I said, I wish I had a lot more time to do this, but currently we had a limited amount of time, so we had to get the biggest bang for the buck. But I'm sure as requests come in for cruciform, as you saw from our original poll, a lot of people aren't using cruciform sections, but that doesn't mean that they're not necessarily required. So currently, no.
Okay. All righty, we will move on to the next question here. What about cruciform with T's that are offset?
Well, it's the same thing. I guess I kind of answered that question already before, which was basically that, yes, these are all in our backlog. I cannot give you a when, but we are completely aware of it. Again, if we get a lot of demand for it, it does affect on our development, because we are planning as we plan for these different things. In fact, there are going to be, just so you know, there will be some things, I can't tell you, that are going to be some improvements that are going to be added into Cruciform in the next upcoming releases. So, but those need to be a surprise. You got to have something to look forward to. Okay, next.
All right, let's go ahead and look at the polls here. We can look at the third poll here. And it's looking like joist. It's pretty close to bent plate, but looks like the joist connection is what people are looking for with the cruciform.
Yeah, it looks like those two. I kind of knew they would be the big ones. They look all split pretty well, actually, to be honest. And now the joist is that we'd also have to consider what type of joist connection. But But yeah, whether it's going to be a seated joist or whether it's going to be, it's probably going to be all of them. So we're going to have to go through and refine and get in what we can. Our goal is to get in what's most popular first. So, but yeah, bent plates. Yeah, I know. Bent plates are always fun. Okay,
All right,
next.
let's go ahead. We're going to start up the fourth and final poll here for you guys. And so the question here is, do you use non-flange cruciform sections?
Yeah, I'd really like to see how many people are using those. Like I said, I've seen in my experience a lot of them used for non-flange cruciform for bracings. But I've also seen them for support columns as well. A lot of times, a bunch of angles, or like I said, angles or T's welded back to back. But I love to hear some more about it. A poll with a yes or no. If you want to add more, just go ahead and send this off to support, designating, the question and what's going on. Okay, any other questions, Mark?
Yes, sir. So next question is for base plates on tubes. We use a bevel all the time instead of a square groove. Can we do this?
Yes, right now the answer is no. That is a high priority in our lists. The reason it wasn't done is because we didn't do it before. Was always just a square groove. So unfortunately, as we were scrambling to get the stuff in, we wanted to make sure we did what we did correctly. And this, like I said, if it wasn't already in the system, that capability, then it wasn't in this case added in. But yes, I know tubes, very common. And by the way, I know that people also want to have this capability in the auto basing cap plate, which is something that right now, if you set it to auto, you want to basically have the same thing that we did for the plate definition schedule. There's just a ton of things that we can obviously improve. There's no end to the room for improvement. So, okay, is there another question?
Yes. What about octagonal base plates?
Yeah, you know what? Cut on plane. No. Again, it's there. Again, I know I'm not promoting to do that, but right now that's about the only way around it. We do see these it's not uncommon to see these octagonal base plates on there. So yes, again, I'll just say, I hate to say it, but yes, it's in our backlog, and we'll see whenever that gets done. Again, I don't know how high a priority that is. This again is where we've got to talk to our stakeholders, and anybody else wants to help us with things. It's always good to contact here and say, hey, I want to help out with that. But I'll leave that to other people. Okay, next question.
All right, let's move on to the poll here and look at the last poll to see what the answers are. It looks like a pretty decisive no here for the non-flange cruciform sections.
There you go. It's so funny when it depends on who you're talking to. I talked to one person like, oh, you've got to have it because that's all they do. And then other people, it's like, nope, never did that. But yeah, we got to get a world cross section. So that's good to know. I do appreciate everybody answering their polls. It really does help. It really does help give me direction when I'm looking at this stuff and bringing it up to the people that are in charge of planning. So appreciate it.
Absolutely. And with all of our customers, anytime if you have suggestions, you can always email support@sds2.com and we can get those suggestions in and so that James can see them and go from there.
Yeah, we need to know what you guys are looking for. And I know here's another thing. Some of you may have said you asked for this years ago. I think you need to give us another shot and ask again. For a lot of things. Some of the things I see coming into the software are just awesome. I've been waiting years for some of them. Like I said, just that base plate to be able to split the flange and web. The guy seriously said, it just brings a tear to my eye. It just made me laugh. It was good to see. So I kind of have the attitude is like, you know what? It's in now. So let's keep on going, forging forward. So any other questions we got?
Yes, we've got one here. Do you have plans to get the components working on cruciform sections?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is one of the things is that, and again, I'm just trying to give you some of the things that we have in our backlog for this. We got to get those components working. We do need to get the Python working. The problem we run into is that these are a little different because they're composite materials. You basically have a rolled section for the wide flange. You have a rolled section for the T's. These are built up sections. So, you know, there's going to be a little bit more work. One of the things is that we want to make sure we get the stiffeners in. We want the design stiffeners as well as the component stiffeners, having those in. The other thing is the welding, because when you're doing cruciform, and I mentioned this earlier, that's why we have the option for none, because for now you can manually do it by setting it to none and then go ahead and using your weld add, because you usually have a stitch weld all the way up to where the connections are, and then at the connections you'll have a full weld for those T's, you know, a foot above and a foot below that. So, you know, that was something that we couldn't accomplish automatically to set that up. But, you know, we might just do that. Again, I'm saying might, just do that as a component that allows the user to set it to none and run a component. We'll see as we go along, you know, it's incremental. That's what we do, is incremental. But we got to make sure that we get what we're doing stable and right first off. Stability is very important to me and us. Okay, any other questions?
One more
Oh.
came in here. So before I read this, just make sure everybody, if you have a question, get it in here while we're going through. But this question, James, is cruciform section considered for ABM?
Yes. Make sure you turn the switch on for it though, because I think by default, and I don't know if this has been fixed yet, you know, I kind of moved off this project, so I haven't been following it as much, but it does come in the ABM, but you have to make sure that it's marked to be added to the ABM. So, you know, when you go through that configuration, you know what I'm talking about, right, Mark?
Yes, sir. You check on for the ABM qualified, so that when you're running your ABM, you can select those material types to move over for a ABM candidate for when you generate your ABM.
Exactly. And if you have any questions, you know, hit our support team. You know, they are great at what they do, and I call a lot of different support teams. So feel free, if you have questions on this, just go ahead and ask them. Sorry, Mark, giving you guys more work, but hey, that's what you're there for.
Absolutely, that's what we're here for. And like you mentioned earlier on in the webinar, we're only successful if our customers are successful. So make sure to contact us with any questions that you have.
Absolutely. Anything else coming in, or is everybody else kind of simmered down on that?
Just simmered down here. So if there are no more questions here, we will let you guys out early. And thank you for watching.
Yeah, it was great. It was fun. Thanks, Mark. And everybody have a great day.